Hi there, in this tutorial I'm going to teach you how to do this sort of glowy look in watercolors using a wet on wet technique. It's such a super easy thing to do and very easy to understand. So hopefully with a little bit of practice and this video you'll figure out how to incorporate it more into your work. I'm going to be using Peerless Watercolors, specifically the colors that they sent in their new mystery box. And so I really hope that you enjoy using those colors and also learning how to use this technique, and hopefully you'll be able to use it in the future in your own paintings. The first thing we need to talk about is what we're going to need to do this sort of effect. Obviously we need paint, and I'm using Peerless Watercolors. The colors that I chose are the ones that go with the mystery box that they just put out, the first one. But if you didn't get that and you want to use the same colors, this is Autumn's Indigo, Sky Blue, Yellow Ochre, Olive Green, Myrtle Green, Sepia Brown, and Spotting Black Opaque. You're also going to need some paint brushes. Honestly, it doesn't really matter what you use. I mean, this is like the cheapest kind of brush you can get. It's like one of those long handle ones. I like snapped it off because I hate long handle brushes, but yeah, you could use anything. I like these round and quill brushes, but that's just like being fancy, so you totally don't have to do that. So just like whatever brush you have is totally cool. We're going to need paper of some sort. I'm going to be using this Lotus Blue sketchbook, but anything works as long as the paper is decent. If you get like cheap watercolor paper from like the dollar store, like you're not going to be able to get this effect. I know that a lot of the times people try to start out with the cheapest because you don't know if like you're going to be into it, but I promise you, you will be significantly less frustrated and upset if you just get like some kind of decent watercolor paper. So this is Cotty paper. If your stores sell them, I would totally grab a pack of it. They're fairly cheap. They're made in India and they're really nice. But other cheap papers that I like to use are Fabriano Studio. That's their like student grade, and that stuff is awesome. So yeah, so there's that. I'm definitely gonna need water. I am so bad at keeping like one that's clean and one that's dirty, but I'm trying really hard because it makes life so much easier. You don't have to keep getting up and down and clean your water. So I have 2 containers of water for that. And then some paper towel. This is like one that I've been using for a while. Kind of looks funky. But I totally recommend, like, if you don't have a rag to use and you're using paper towels, let that dry out and you can reuse it over and over. And then finally, we're gonna need a heat gun. You totally don't need to. I'm really, really impatient when it comes to painting. I hate sitting and waiting while paint dries, so I like to use this. You can use a hair dryer or just let it dry naturally. Before we paint any sort of glowy object or glowy mushrooms, we're gonna need to practice the technique. It's pretty simple. Like in theory, it's really easy to understand and really easy to grasp, but it does take a little bit of practice. The biggest thing that you want to watch out for is your water. If you're using way too much water, your backgrounds are not going to dry evenly, which could be super frustrating. So let's see. I guess I'll use this brush. So I'm just making sure that my paint brush doesn't have anything on it. I'm really bad at cleaning them, so I don't want my yellow to get like funky. So my brush is pretty wet and I'm just going to see crazy. Just gonna paint like a little square of water. I'm sure you can't see that. So the technique we're doing is wet on wet. So you lay some water down, and then you're gonna put wet paint into that. I decided just for this exercise, a simple one, I'm using yellow ochre and autumn's indigo just because like I want to make it as easy as possible. But use any yellow or blue or whatever. Okay, so to activate this paint, you definitely don't need a lot of it. And I'm going to just kind of start swiping it in the middle. You can make your glow like any shape, like if you want to make it like a long row of this yellow, or if you want to make it like a, I don't know, triangle, like it's all good. Do whatever. Okay, so once I have that, look, I'm already using my clean water to clean my brush. Okay, try to be better. Okay, so now I want to take blue, and I'm just going to go around this. If you live in a really dry place, I would just be careful, because if it starts to dry on you, you're gonna have weird lines. But thankfully, or maybe not so thankfully, I live in a very humid place, so I don't really have to worry about that too much. So now I'm cleaning off my brush, and I'm going to wipe it off so that it is damp still, but not wet. This might even be too dry. Yeah, you'll just need to practice and kind of get the feel for it, but essentially like I'm touching my fingers and like I could see the liquid on it, but it's not like drops of water. And now I've wiped all the liquid off. So, okay, so there we go. Now what we're gonna do is kind of swipe in between these. Sorry if you hear my cat. And this will start to give us a gradient. So I'm like going a little bit in the yellow, a little bit in the blue, back and forth. Again, if you live in a dry place, or if you find this is just drying quickly, you're gonna wanna do all of it, like a pass over all of it first, and then you can like go in and adjust. So that way you don't have one space that's like super dry. I can already tell here I'm gonna need more blue paint, like I didn't get it close enough. So I'm just gonna get some of that. Clean off my brush and then kind of wipe some of that off, and then start blending. Okay, I can tell I would like some more yellow. It's pretty concentrated in one area. So I'm just gonna take some. Maybe that's too much water. And start dragging it out. You can tell this paper here is not built for this sort of layering and scrubbing. It doesn't really bother me, but if it bothers you, don't use this paper. That's what happens with like handmade stuff though. It's just, you know. All right, so I feel pretty good about this. And I don't know if you can see, but I don't have like any big globs of water. But say you're doing this and you end up with like a big puddle. What you're gonna wanna do is take your clean brush, and that's kind of dried off, and just set your brush in the puddle. It'll start sucking up some of that water. If you let it sit there, it's not gonna dry evenly. Everything around the puddle is gonna dry first, and then as this dries, you're gonna get lines. So if you don't want that, make sure you soak up any of those. But now what I'm gonna do is just dry it with my heat gun so that we can see what it looks like, and then we can either keep practicing, or maybe you wanna just like, you know, play around with the colors. That's totally cool, and then we can jump into painting the mushrooms. Alright, so here it is. As you can tell, like, there's still the paper stuff from like when I was scrubbing. Once it's dry, you can pretty much just like wipe it away, but be careful because it can put spots in places. Again, I'm not too worried about that, especially because this is just in my sketchbook and this is practice, but yeah, if you want to get rid of those, that's what you do with that. But I mean, this is pretty good. It's not completely smooth. Like, I can see some harsh lines, but the best part about watercolors is that it's so free and kind of like whatever it wants to do, it's gonna do. And I think a lot of the times people have a hard time controlling it, and I think that way of thinking is what makes it so difficult. So if you're trying to control this thing that is like just wants to be wild and crazy, then you're gonna have a really hard time. But if you kind of just lean into it and let it be like its own thing, I think it's a lot easier. But I will say that, like, my fiance, he tried watercolors for a while, and he is a perfectionist and he likes to control things, and so I don't think watercolors will ever be his thing. Like, it stressed him out like to no end. But yeah. Rambling aside, this is how you do that. And in the next one, I think I might switch to just like a sheet of paper, so that way like I don't have this big clunky thing in the way. And I'm gonna try to get more up close so that you could see like in detail what I'm doing, as opposed to the overhead. But we'll see how it goes. But yeah, so I'm gonna get a sheet of paper and then we can jump into the final painting. Okay, I think this scrap of paper is Fabriano Artistico, but I am totally not sure. I don't label anything, and I kind of just have random stuff everywhere, so hopefully that's what it is. So I'm gonna just go ahead and get started. Essentially, I'm gonna start in the same way as we did our practice, and then we'll add things on top. Now, I think I'm gonna just paint one glowing mushroom, but if you wanted to paint multiples, you would have multiple points of the yellow. But yeah, that is a little bit more complicated, and I figured starting with one would be an easier first step for this tutorial. So, all right, I'm gonna go ahead and start. Instead of going just straight into Autumn's Indigo, I'm gonna add, I think, a little bit of sky blue. Just so that you can see how to blend multiple colors together. I'm going right on the edge of this yellow. Actually, let's add a little bit more. Okay, and now I'm gonna take a clean, damp brush and just swipe over the edge. You can already tell that I want this yellow to be brighter, so I'm gonna add some in there and just start blending outwards. There we go. And now I'm gonna go ahead and add the indigo. So at this point, do you see how I'm starting to drag a lot of color into where the yellow is? I'm gonna clean my brush off again, and so that way I'm not dragging the color. Oy. I can tell I'm doing it again, so I'm gonna clean my brush. Okay. I know that I want the edges of the indigo to be very dark. So I'm just gonna add a little bit more the outside, and then I'm going to blend that again. Okay, now that my background is dry, I'm going to go ahead and start painting in the mushroom. If you need to, you can draw it out, but I mean, this is just for tutorial sake, so I'm just gonna like go for it. So I'm using this smaller brush because I know that if I use that big one, I'm gonna get weird globby edges. This is a size 6, but you know, whatever you have on hand is totally good. I think I'm going to start with, I think this is olive green. You see, yeah, olive green. Where the cap of the mushroom is, I want it to be a little less dark, a lot lighter, because that's where the light is supposedly coming from. So in the center of where my yellow is, I'm just gonna paint in this olive green a mushroom cap. I think I want it something like this. Okay, and now I'm going to fill it in. I think I want to add yellow into the center, similar to what we did in the background. That way it looks more glowy, and like the light is coming from the mushroom instead of behind it. So I'm actually gonna put, if I would have thought about that beforehand, I would have put the shape in first of the, in just clean water and done the wet on wet, but I did not. So I'm gonna have to work a little harder with the edges. I'm sure you could see, like here, there's some edges of the olive green that I will need to blend out, but that's okay. I think I'm gonna bring this side down a little bit so it's not so straight across. So my brush is clean and damp, and now I'm just going in and blending. If it's too wet, you're gonna start picking up some of the paint and leaving white spots. That's why I like to dry off my brush a little bit. I think I need more yellow down here. There you go. Okay, I'm going to dry this and then I'll start working on the stalk part of the mushroom. Okay, I think for this part I'm also going to start with myrtle green, or I'm sorry, olive green, and then I'm going to go in with some myrtle green. So for this bit, I'm thinking of just making it a little swoopy, but nothing too crazy. If you're having a hard time coming up with shapes, the best way to figure that stuff out is just by looking up some pictures. But I've drawn so many mushrooms in my life that I don't really need to do anything crazy. Okay, I'm touching some of that myrtle green right underneath. And maybe I'll put some on the sides here too. I think I actually want to add some dark, like, grasses and stuff down here, like silhouettes, just so that it maybe looks a little more naturey, like you're looking at a mushroom in a forest instead of just a mushroom on a pretty smooth background. Just using myrtle green for this, but in the mystery box, some black was added, so you can use that too. Especially if your indigo, like when you put that down, if it's too dark and you can't really see this when you're adding it on top. But I think I might go in with indigo afterward, or not indigo, with the black afterwards, just to add another layer of grass in front of this. And once everything is dry. Okay, I'm gonna dry this. Okay, so now that all of this is dry, I'm going to add some details into the mushroom itself. I think for this I'm gonna start with some sepia brown, but I might switch around to other things too. So definitely look at some pictures of mushrooms if you're unsure like where to add these sort of ridges. I don't really know the scientific names. I should probably learn, but I'm adding just like a little bit of shadow up into here. I think possibly just like along this whole edge. Oops. Being really gentle. One of the things about Peerless Watercolors is that they can lift pretty easily, which is a good and bad thing depending on, you know, what technique you're using. I mean, I think it's awesome because if you make mistakes, they're very easy to correct. But when you're layering, you kind of have to adopt this gentle approach instead of like when I'm normally painting with just like store-bought tube watercolors, I could just like kind of scrub things around. But this is nice. I mean, it makes you kind of think of the process and be a little bit more mindful. But if you find yourself struggling when you're first using them, don't worry, like it definitely just takes some time, but I mean the colors are just like completely worth it. They're so vibrant. Okay, so I have this. I think I might dry it before I add the other details just because I don't want it to bleed into my shadows that I have there. Okay, I'm gonna continue with the sepia. It's such a dark color when it's concentrated, so I'm trying to be light with it, have a lot of water, but also not let my brush be super wet. As you could tell, like you could see the point on my brush pretty well, and so that means that there's not like a ton of water. If it was soaked, you would see like it would be a lot fuller and you would see the point less. So now that I have this, I'm going to add some texture into the cap itself. think I'm gonna add some, like a split here, and then make this a little bit darker. So like you're looking at the stalk underneath the cap. And I think that was myrtle green that we used in here. I also just want to make the shadow a little bit darker here. So I'm using that blending technique where my brush is clean but not soaking. Okay, I'm gonna keep going with the details on the cap. I feel pretty good about that. I'm going to then dry this because I added a little bit to the stock, but if you didn't, then you're good to go. But I'm gonna dry it and then I'll come back and add some stuff to that. Okay, I'm gonna continue with sepia, but if you wanna do some other colors, that's totally cool. Essentially, I'm going to just be making some vertical lines to make it look kind of wrinkly, just give it a little more detail so it doesn't look so much like a, I don't know, stock image from the 70s or something. I also like to keep in mind that because I'm using so many different colors, normally like when I'm doing these sorts of paintings, I keep it monochromatic or even just 2 colors. But because there's so many colors in this range that I couldn't narrow it down. But I want to make sure that I'm adding, like if I have this sepia brown in one area, I want to add it to another area so it seems more cohesive, so you don't just have that one color in one area. So that'll make your colors a little more harmonious. But so I have that. I think I'm gonna add some green into it. This one is myrtle green, just to pull down from the top where we have it as a shadow color. I think I want to maybe just work with the texture of the paper a little bit. And just kind of add a little, I don't know what to call it, crap. So it's not so smooth and perfect, you know. Adding more of the myrtle green onto this side just because that's where our shadow is of the cap. It's on the left, so doing that same thing here. Maybe what I'll do is add some yellow too, just because you would get some of that glowiness on there from the cap. Another thing about Peerless is normally if you're working with watercolors that are very staining, you're not going to be able to add lighter colors on top because, the dark colors will just eat them up. But because I can kind of lift some of this while adding the yellow in, you can get a lighter color on top. Yeah, I feel like that's pretty good. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and dry this and then we can add some black details. Okay, so it's all dry. I'm gonna take some of the spotting black opaque and I'm gonna add some more grass and stuff, nature bits. This way I can get some leaves and stuff in front of the mushroom. So we'll push it back a little bit. Okay, I'm gonna dry this. So that's how you make the glowy kind of effect that I feature in a lot of my work. It doesn't have to be limited to just glowy mushrooms. The wet on wet technique is pretty versatile. I'll show you some examples. This is like really old. So it's not necessarily the cleanest, but here's multiple mushrooms and you can see some blooming around the edges. I actually really like how that looks. There's another one that I kind of did the same sort of circle-y one. But there's one there. Let's see. There's another one. So a lot less concentrated on the light, like in a perfect circle, but more of just like a softer edged one. And then more recently are these. So here's one that started in a similar way, where I had put some of the yellow down and then blue around the edges, but I was using such light and soft paint and not really any distinct shape where the yellow was like I am in these, and this allows it to be a little softer, a little moodier, less intense. There's a practice I was doing. Let's see. Here's one. So this one is kind of the same deal. It's a little bit more vibrant, but instead of a circle, I kind of just did it in like a organic pattern, so that it wouldn't look so much like it is coming from one specific source. And this one started the same way as well. Yellow with like blue on the outside. And this is pretty different. I mean, I started in the same way where I added the yellow sort of glowy effect, but then afterwards I layered colored pencil on top of it. So there's like so much that you could do with this. And you're definitely not just limited to this sort of very perfect circle or this sort of subject. You know, you can use this technique to do a wide range of things. So that's pretty much it for the tutorial. I hope you liked learning, and I hope this helps with some future watercoloring projects. If you have any questions about my work or specifics about the tutorial, go ahead and shoot me a message on Instagram. I'll link it in the description. And if you have any questions about the paint or the mystery box specifically, send a message over to Dalton at Peerless Watercolors. He's super great and always happy to help, and I really highly recommend these paints if you're looking for vibrant, amazing colors that you don't see in traditional watercolors. So yeah, I hope you liked this tutorial, and I can't wait to see you in the next one. Bye.